Dad can get me a car.
Well, I would normally say good evening, but this is a last moment stream that we're putting up because we discovered that the video we posted last night didn't have any audio. He had me sitting here running my mouth, but you couldn't hear anything. And that was very puzzling to me because we had done some changes last week and I had trouble getting the microphones to work. And so I was very careful to watch the meters and be sure that I was in fact getting audio. So I knew that was working. So the software that I used for this was telling me that I was getting audio, but it was
I don't
lying.
think you're on right now.
What?
I don't think you're on right now.
Why?
Oh, well, what is Facebook doing?
I don't know. Probably took it a while for it to catch on that I was.
You're way down my stream, like 3 or 4 down instead of up at the top.
Well, no, I won't be at the top because we've got those posts that are pinned.
Oh, they're pinned? Why would you pin your Friday night studies?
I didn't pin the Friday night studies. I pinned.
You put me on in the Friday night studies and I couldn't find you. Okay, never mind. Hello, good morning, everyone. I'll shut up.
Does it
Well,
show?
don't count on that.
Does it show that we have audio?
Let me find out.
Well,
Say something. Let me find out.
as I was about to say, the software was lying to me because it was showing that I was getting audio, but I wasn't. And I dug around in the settings and went into audio settings and only had one microphone that was enabled, the one I'm not using, so I don't get echo. The one that I am using, the switch that I made last week, that audio was disabled. So I went in and clicked it on as enabled again, and yeah, it's life. And it has been an eventful week in our house. Over the weekend, my wife developed some issues that she needed to see her doctor about. She called the office Monday. They couldn't get her in until 8:30 Tuesday morning. Well, as retired people, 8:30 we're usually sound asleep about that time, and it was going to require getting up quite a bit ahead of time to get everything ready and get my wife out in the car and out to the office and so forth. But it was what we could get, so we took it. And so we went in early on Tuesday, and he gave her a prescription, sent her home, and so she's working on that. Well, apparently from the stress of that, sometime Tuesday night, her eyelid itched, and she went to scratch it with her long fingernail, only she forgot to close the eyelid first. So she actually hit the eye with that fingernail. And that started bothering her a whole bunch. So we called the eye doctor's office on Wednesday, and they got us in that afternoon. So then we had to go to all the rigmarole of getting my wife out into the car and driving her over there and everything that goes with that. And he gave
And I
her.
found it interesting how he was able to examine my eye without any light.
Yeah, the light hurt her eye.
I had my eye covered with big thick gauze taped to my eye to keep my eye shut.
Yeah.
And then I had on the really dark glasses that they gave my husband when he had cataract surgery. So light shouldn't have bothered me, but even that was still too much light and it was hurting. And they put me in a dark room, and the doctor was able to examine my eye using a Doppler.
Diopter. a 12 diopter lens that allowed him to, essentially a magnifying glass, and he used a local light on that and was able to light the eye itself without shining the light in the pupil. And he put something in to deaden her eye, and then he put a dye in her eye to help him see what was there, and he saw it. And like I say, he gave her a prescription, and the prescription makes her feel like there's something in her eye. Well, technically there is, because it's a gel. But anyway.
Yeah, it kind of glues my eyes shut, but it also makes me feel like I've got my eye full of grit.
Anyway, that was my
It hurt my upper teeth on that side. Those teeth are either all extracted or root canaled. And despite that, they still hurt. They're sensitive to heat and cold because of that eye injury still.
Well, anyway, those events were my excuse not to get out and do anything about the lawn, which I had decided I needed to do this week. So I did that Thursday, and I got wounded as a result. Those are covering blisters that develop because you're having to push the mower, and you've been soft all winter, and you haven't exercised it, and you're not adjusted to it. Plus, first cutting in the spring, particularly since I waited so long to do it, it was very hard to push them, or the places where it just didn't want to go. I had to kind of work it up and down, back and forth to get it to push through, and push hard to get it through.
I just had an idea.
Thank you. What?
Well, I don't like that eye goo. How about you take it for me to heal your thumb?
Well, anyway, we did get the weeds shortened. I'm using that terminology because there wasn't any grass to mow. It was just weeds, so we shortened the weeds. It does make the lawn look a little better. And in the process, I came across something. Now, I had seen an ant nest on our lawn earlier over in a corner, and I had dealt with it. But there was another one that I wasn't aware was there, and I hadn't dealt with it. It had gotten huge, bigger than one I've ever seen in this lawn. Now, when I was a kid in Mississippi, I saw fire ant nests that were bigger than that. And I think these were fire ants. That's usually what we get here outside. And it did look like they're kind of a hill. Anyway.
How about we give the eye goo to the ants?
Well, anyway, so that was our week, and then last night we pre-recorded our Bible study, and because we're having to do this, it didn't work. The audio didn't go through, so I had to do a couple of test recordings until I got audio out of them. So hopefully
I
now.
wasn't feeling good yesterday, and I fell asleep during the thing, and I decided this morning to listen to it, pick up on what I missed.
And there wasn't any sound.
There wasn't any audio.
Yeah, so we're doing this. We're live streaming it. Of course, maybe not many people will pick it up on the live stream, but that way we will have it. And we're also recording it for me to put on the YouTube. So I have to change what's on YouTube because I already had the soundless one uploaded to YouTube without being aware that it didn't have any sound. Like I say, the software lied to me. Another thing that we talked about last night, and I'd like to mention again, was some research that I did yesterday. As you know, I'm a very, very amateur piano player. Not very good at it, but I do play it some, and I do like to play it. So very often when it's just me in the house and my wife in the other room where it isn't going to bother her too much, I'll practice. And one way of practicing, I've been trying to improve my note reading, so I'll take a book of music, be it a hymnal or some other book of music, and try and sight read it through. And I've been doing that with a hymnal, and I happened to think of a story that I heard when I was considerably younger. And it was the story of a particular hymn. And I remembered that it involved Fanny Crosby, who wrote the words for a lot of hymns. And I remembered the basic outline of the story. And I had looked through over the years various sources of stories about hymns to see how it was done, and I was unable to find it to verify which song it was that the story involved. And I believe I'd even tried a Google search on it some time ago and had come up with nothing. But I tried it again, and either I worded it differently or the search engine has improved its capabilities, and it came up with a couple of stories. So this may have happened not once, not twice, but maybe even more than that. The specific one that I had in mind, the one that shows up at the top of the list, involves a lady named Phoebe Palmer. Phoebe Palmer wrote music, and she had written a piece of music that she had designed and intended for a hymn of sorts. And she wasn't a wordsmith, but she was friends with Fanny Crosby. So she visited Fanny Crosby, and she played it for her and asked her, could you come up with words for that? And immediately Fanny Crosby came up with "Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine." Now, in most hymn books, if you look up "Blessed Assurance," it will tell you that the music is provided by Mrs. Joseph F. Knapp. And in fact, she did marry a Joseph F. Knapp. She was born Phoebe Palmer, and so she was known as Phoebe Palmer Knapp, oftentimes. And the story of that actually is kind of interesting. Mr. Knapp was not a nobody. He was a big shot of sorts. He was one of the founders and the second president of Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. He and his wife lived in New York City, and they attended a Methodist Episcopal church in New York City, the very church that Fanny Crosby attended. And that's how Phoebe and Fanny became friends. And so then we have that story. That was not the only time something like that happened. And it may be that the other story is the one I heard, because it stuck in my head that it involved William H. Doane, another composer who would often set words to music, but apparently also would write things without having words yet. And he did that at one point, and he needed to catch a train. It was 40 minutes away, he needed to do it, but he stopped by where Fanny lived, and he played the song for her. And he played, and he asked her, "What does that song say to you?" And she replied, "It says, 'Safe in the arms of Jesus.'" And that actually, she prepared some words for him. I'm guessing she prepared more verses for it later, but she gave something to him to take with him on the train. But that's how that song came about, and it became one of Fanny's favorite hymns. So I find the history of hymns kind of interesting. So that was interesting to find that out. Mia, you don't know how to type. Don't be sitting on keyboards. No. The point is, you're not supposed to be walking on it. Huh. That's our cranky cat. Yeah, you can sit up there. That's a good place for a cat. Well, I think it's time that we began. Um, let's bow our heads and we'll have a word of prayer to begin. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings to us. We thank you for the week that is past and for having provided so many things for us. We're especially grateful to understand your fundamental goodness and your benevolence toward us. We understand from what John wrote that you are love, not just that you love people, but that you are love. That love is the foundational principle of your universe. We want to grow to be in harmony with that because we believe that's the way for society to work and that nothing else will. We know that we're broken, we need fixing, and we turn sometimes to the Word for help in that endeavor, and that's what we're doing now as we study the events out of the Word and what it has to say. We want the Holy Spirit to help each one of us gather from it what you have in mind and to begin that process or continue that process of character transformation that will heal us. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, we're ready for Genesis chapter 31, and we've been reading the story here of a highly dysfunctional family. And we mentioned last night, and I think I'll mention this again, we've been seeing how the dysfunction tends to get worse and worse from one generation to the next. So we have Terah's household, and who knows what all was going on there, but it's likely there was some idolatry involved. There is a Jewish tradition that even Isaac chided his father for idolatry. And there may have been other things going on. We know there was that attempt on Abraham's part to achieve God's promise through human means. And that led to family strife because he had a child by his wife's maidservant, and that caused problems once the son of his own wife was born. And
Well, it was her idea to begin with, and then she blamed him.
yeah, well, we
blamed it. He went along with her.
mm-hmm. Well, again, there may have been more to it than what we read, because we've seen several instances where we believe that the account is trying to blame things on the women rather than admit the man's responsibility in it. And considering that these stories were most likely passed on by men, it's not surprising that they would possibly inadvertently minimize the involvement of the men and maximize the involvement of the women. Not because they were trying to lie, just because the culture and their own view of life would lead them to see things in a particular way.
Well, in that culture, without a son, Sarah was essentially nothing.
Well, that's true.
And there she was, the wife of the leader, and she was considered to be nothing. And that's a blow for anybody's ego.
Yeah. Well, at any rate, the point that we were getting to is that as this goes on, we have Abraham, and then we have Isaac. Of course, we have Abraham hauling Isaac off to a mountain to kill him. He didn't actually do it, and Isaac apparently submitted to it, but we see evidence that it's possible that they went low contact from that point on. So that was a damaging event in Isaac's life. And then Isaac, Dad arranged a marriage for him. He was,
an incestuous marriage.
well, by our standards, was not as incestuous as his father's marriage, but yeah. By the standards of the time, I don't think it was any really big deal. But it was a sort of inbreeding.
But I wonder if that inbreeding would have had any bearing on the women's inability to have children.
Who knows?
I'm not a medical specialist. I wouldn't know that. I just wonder.
Well, at any rate, so you have that going on, and then Isaac ends up playing favorites with his sons, and that creates the kind of trouble that we're currently reading about. We're about to see that Jacob played favorites with his sons, and that would cause major problems in his family and bring a lot of grief to Jacob himself. But at some point, it kind of seems to go away. And we think this may be an illustration of the principle that is repeated both in Exodus 20 in the second commandment and again in Exodus 34 in God's description of his character to Moses, where he talks about visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation. And the traditional interpretation is that is, if you make God mad, then God's going to be mad at you and your children and your grandchildren, sometimes even your great-grandchildren or great-great-grandchildren. He's just going to, keep being mad. We don't think...
That used to really hurt.
Huh?
That used to really hurt me. God was punishing me for something that one of my ancestors had done. Why? Why would he do that? Well, truthfully, he didn't. He doesn't.
Well, but what he's really, I think, saying there, and we've touched on this before, is that just by the nature of things, when a child suffers abuse, they by nature and by evolution do whatever they can to cope with that abuse and to avoid the pain. And in doing so, they develop faulty coping mechanisms. And then when they have their own families, they tend to use those coping mechanisms in their own families, and that generates abuse of their children and spreads the brokenness and the poor coping mechanisms and so forth on from one generation to the next.
They tend to pass on the abuse that they received because they believe that that's the way it's supposed to be done.
Yeah. You'll even hear parents say that. That's how my dad raised me. By God, I'm going to do my kid the same way. But observers have noticed that often breaks down after 3 or 4 generations. That somehow God has managed to put in a level of protection so that this doesn't continue and continue and continue and continue. It breaks down and someone breaks the mold and steps out of it around the 3rd or 4th generation. And we may be seeing that in these stories. And as we get further on in these stories, we'll talk about how the different members of Jacob's family overcame the mess they were raised in. But we've also been reading chapters 29 and 30 that we did last week about how Jacob moved to Paddan Aram to get a wife. He worked 7 years because he wanted to marry Rachel. He married Rachel, only his uncle passed Leah off instead of Rachel. He found out in the morning who he'd actually gotten. That was too late then. And so after a week, he got Rachel too, but he had to work another 7 years to pay her bride price. And then another 6 years, and we'll see, as what we're reading tonight, how we get that math and how we calculate that. He began
and the
working.
question is, to me, why did Rachel go along with that?
Patriarchal society. You did what Dad told you to do.
Possibly, and it's possible that she just didn't like Jacob.
Well,
Found it to be an easy way to get out of a marriage that she didn't want.
well, I guess that's possible. The evidence seems to suggest that, well, I don't know. Maybe, there's the story we read where she asked for Reuben's mandrakes, hoping to seduce her husband, but then to get them, she had to let her sister have her husband.
Why would she need to seduce the man who loved her?
Who knows? Who knows how those people thought? And we're about to see that Rachel inherited her father's conniving and manipulative ways. And what we were talking about there in chapters 29 and 30 is the way that Jacob at least attempted to manipulate the situation to improve his own wealth at the expense of his uncle. And we'll talk about that more as we read through this, but Jacob was trying to manipulate, Laban was trying to manipulate, the daughters were trying to manipulate. We just got people here being jerks all the way around. And now we reach the beginning of chapter 31. And it says, "But Jacob soon learned that Laban's sons were grumbling about him. 'Jacob has robbed our father of everything,' they said. 'He has gained all his wealth at our father's expense.' And Jacob began to notice a change in Laban's attitude toward him." Now, this is an interpretive rendition, translation. It doesn't translate directly, it kind of interprets and puts the interpretation in its translation. So, what the King James says there is that Jacob notices that Laban's countenance was not toward him like it was before. Well, that's a roundabout way of saying that there was a change in the attitude. Most modern translations do use attitude instead of countenance. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your father and grandfather and to your relatives there, and I will be with you." Now, who is included in his relatives there in the land of Abraham and Isaac?
Something you're not saying that you were mentioning last night is that Jacob had made a bargain with God. If you will do this, and this, and that. When he was on his way out there to Laban's, he tried to make a bargain with God. If you will do this and this and this for me, then I will follow you.
Yeah.
And then throughout, he still, at this point, when he's being told to leave, he still has not accepted to follow, to claim him as his God.
Well, we haven't mentioned that yet because we haven't gotten that far in the story.
I thought we had.
We'll get there in a moment.
Pardon me.
But I was asking the question, it says, return to the land of your father and grandfather and to your relatives there, and I will be with you. And I was asking who else of his relatives would have been there in the land of Abraham and Isaac.
Who else of his relatives?
Yeah.
Well, Abraham's clan that's still alive.
Okay. But there's a more
Maybe
specific.
brother,
Huh?
his brother that wanted to kill him.
Yeah. That's what I was looking for. Father and grandfather and to your relatives there, including your brother, and I will be with you. Okay. It's
And
kind of
Isaac was
saying
afraid.
you left your home because your brother had threatened to kill you. Now I'm telling you to go back there. I'll be with you. I think he's trying to tell Jacob, I will protect you. Although I think we're going to find out that there wasn't a whole lot of protection necessary, but at this point Jacob doesn't know that. So Jacob called Rachel and Leah out to the field where he was watching his flock. He said to them, I have noticed that your father's attitude toward me has changed. And again, in the King James, it uses countenance there. But the God of my father has been with me.
The God of my father.
Yeah. He isn't saying my God yet. And that's where we bring up the bargain that he made with God at Bethel, the house of God, a name that he gave to it when he turned the stone up and poured oil on it. He called it Bethel because he had seen God there. And the bargain that he made, the commerce type transaction that he engaged in, was, if you will be with me, if you will bless me, if you will give me wives and children, and if you will give me flocks and herds and wealth, if you'll do these things, then you will be my God.
You notice he's asking for earthly riches?
Yeah.
If you will give me earthly riches, then I will follow you. And this is purely prosperity gospel.
Well, yeah, that's nothing new, is it?
No.
So he makes that deal. If you do these things, then you can be my God. But he hasn't really reached that point yet, because he's saying the God of my father has been with me. You know how hard I have worked for your father, but he has cheated me. Well, that's Jacob's view of it anyway. Jacob was trying to cheat him. Why shouldn't his uncle cheat him in return? Changing my wages 10 times. And we read about the initial setup on the wages, and we read about the things that Jacob did. But then it's not until we get here that we find out that whenever Laban thought that Jacob was getting a better deal than him, he'd change it. Jacob says, but God has not allowed him to do me any harm. And then verse 8, for if he said, the speckled animals will be your wages, the whole flock began to produce speckled young. And when he changed his mind and said, the striped animals will be your wages, then the whole flock produced striped young. In this way, God has taken your father's animals and given them to me. And in that culture,
That he said God did it while he was actively committing the act of voodoo.
well, we have suggested when we read that last week that the things that Jacob did didn't have any real actual effect. They didn't work the way he thought they worked. But we also made the point that he believed they were working. So to that extent, he was being manipulative, even if the manipulation he was doing wasn't really working. But he did well, and he got a lot of animals. And this is the very thing that his cousins, Laban's sons, are believing. They're believing, and in part because probably they've seen how Jacob operates and what kind of a person he is, that Jacob has become rich at their father's and thus their own expense.
Of course, Jacob may have been a bit of a character and was doing that in front of his cousins simply to tick them off.
Oh,
No,
he might
I
have
really
been.
didn't mean anything.
I mean, if you're gonna force your brother to give you the right of the firstborn in order to get some food, yeah, you've got some problems relating to other people. Does not work well with others, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, Now,
Here, let me give you something to not like me about.
mm-hmm.
Let me give you a reason to not like me.
The question becomes, without Jacob's assistance, would Laban have been better off than he was with Jacob's assistance, even counting all the animals that Jacob claimed as his during the 6 years? We haven't done the math for that yet, but we will. The 6 years that he worked to amass his own wealth. I have an idea that without Jacob's help, Laban's flocks and herds would not have grown like they did under Jacob, and so the improvement belonged to Jacob because it was Jacob who brought it about. Now, reading on, verse 10. One time during the mating season, I saw a dream and saw that the male goats mating with the females were streaked, speckled, and spotted. Then in my dream, the angel of God said to me, Jacob, and I replied, Yes, here I am. The angel said, Look up, and you will see that only the streaked, speckled, and spotted males are mating with the females of your flock. For I have seen how Laban has treated you. I am the God who appeared to you at Bethel, or the footnote there is to tell us in the Hebrew, it just says the God of Bethel, the place where you anointed the pillar of stone and made your vow to me. Now get ready and leave this country and return to the land of your birth. So this is the second retelling of the encounter Jacob had, which told him that it was time to leave and go back to his home country, where he had been raised.
And he probably should never have gone to his uncle's in the first place.
Well, yeah, that's.
God told Abraham, leave that place.
Mm-hmm.
And when you leave the place like that, and God tells you, you might really ought to cut family ties, but they didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
They kept going back.
Mm-hmm. Rachel and Leah responded, That's fine with us. We won't inherit any of our father's wealth anyway. He has reduced our rights to those of foreign women. And after he sold us, he wasted the money you paid him for us. Well, Jacob didn't pay with money, he paid with labor. But it's likely that Jacob's labor did improve Laban's economic status. And it is possible that, as his daughters indicate here, he wasted it. And if in fact he wasted it, as these girls see it, then the lack of wealth that their brothers are fussing about at the beginning of the chapter is due as much to their father's management as it is to Jacob's manipulation.
Go back in the story when Abraham's servant arrived seeking a husband for Isaac, seeking a wife for Isaac.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the role that Laban played?
Yeah.
He was interested in this man's money,
Yeah.
goods.
Mm-hmm.
Which would indicate that Laban was all about having physical, earthly wealth
Mm-hmm.
things.
Yeah. Well, what the girls are saying here is that if you have gotten wealthy at our father's expense, that's only just and right, because we should have gotten something from our father, and he's worked it out that we won't get anything from him, so we'll get it by being with you. So we plan to stay with you and go with you, and not stay with our father because he's not going to give us anything anyway. All the wealth God has given you from our father legally belongs to us and our children, so go ahead and do whatever God has told you.
Now,
So,
these are his wives. Could he have been forced to leave them behind?
I don't know. I don't think so, but we're going to see what happens in this story as we move on, because it gets crazy. I sometimes like to watch a lawyer who posts courtroom videos on a YouTube channel, and he will frequently say, comment in the middle of the proceedings, "It gets worse," because he usually posts videos of people acting stupid in court. And so he'll say, yeah, it looks all straightforward and nice right now, but it gets worse. So about this story, I think we can say it gets worse. So Jacob put his wives and children on camels, and he drove all his livestock in front of him. He packed all the belongings he had acquired in Paddan Aram and set out for the land of Canaan, where his father Isaac lived. At the time they left, Laban was some distance away, shearing his sheep. Rachel stole her father's household idols and took them with her. Jacob outwitted Laban the Aramean, for they set out secretly and never told him they were leaving. So Jacob took all his possessions with him and crossed the Euphrates River. Then the footnote there is going to tell us that it's just the river in Hebrew. So we don't know for sure what river he crossed. It might have been the Jordan River, but it might also have been the Euphrates River. The interpreters, the translators have said the Euphrates River, because usually when the Old Testament talks about the river, it means the Euphrates. And he's heading for the hill country of Gilead. Gilead would have been the land east of Jordan, the land inhabited by the Transjordan tribes, once the Israelites entered the land of Canaan. Some of them took the land east of Jordan that they conquered before they actually crossed the Jordan to enter the main portion of Israel. And that was granted to 2.5 tribes as their inheritance. So that's the land of Gilead, and that's where Jacob is heading. Now, let me see if I've got it open. I do. Now let's next see if I've got it in the right place. Not right now. I have Google Earth here with a map of Palestine, and this area right here is the Dead Sea. Here's the Jordan River going from the Sea of Galilee, or Lake of Galilee really, southward toward the Dead Sea down through here. And so this area to the east of that is what would be called Gilead. But the thing is that the Euphrates River is way over here. And if you look a little bit more, this is Iraq. Babylon would have been, let's see, there's Baghdad. Babylon was down in this area. And I think, was even farther off over this way. We know that Abraham left it was Abram at the time, left and traveled to wherever this Paddan Aram is, or Haran. But if these interpreters are right, and Jacob is crossing the Euphrates as he leaves Paddan Aram, then Paddan Aram was not at this time here in Syria, unless it was way north in Syria. I guess he could have crossed the Euphrates there, but not down in this part of Syria like we think of it. At any rate, he's going to be on this side of the Jordan River as we go on in our story. So that's where he's headed. 3 days later, verse 22, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. So he gathered a group of his relatives and set out in hot pursuit. He caught up with Jacob 7 days later in the hill country of Gilead. So he was almost home when he was just shy of the Jordan River when Laban caught up with him. But the previous night, God had appeared to Laban the Aramean in a dream and told him, I'm warning you, leave Jacob alone. Laban caught up with Jacob as he was camped in the hill country of Gilead, and he set up his camp not far from Jacob's. Now, you might read the rest of this in the mindset of a court case, because these two have a disagreement. They have a disagreement about what should have happened. They have a disagreement about what should happen from here on out. And they are making their case in the statements that we're going to read. And so Laban's going to speak, and Jacob's going to speak, and Laban's going to speak. And let's just read through this and see the cases that each of them make, and listen to the lies each of them tells. I say lies, the distortions of the truth that they engage in attempting to make their case. What do you mean by deceiving me like this? Laban demanded. How dare you drag my daughters away like prisoners of war? Well, were they prisoners? Did he say, come with me whether you want to or not? What we read earlier was that he took them out to the field and he talked to them, and they said, we're with you. If you want to go, we'll go. We don't have anything, we don't have any connection to our father. We're happy to leave him. But that's the case that he makes. Why did you slip away secretly? Well, we know he did that, so that part's true. Why did you deceive me? Did he deceive him? Well, in a sense, yeah. His name Jacob means deceiver.
At least you avoid exactly what's happening.
Well, yeah, we're going to get there. Yes, Jacob, supplanter, deceiver. Yeah, he deceived him. We'll grant that to Laban. And why didn't you say you wanted to leave? I would have given you a farewell feast with singing and music, accompanied by tambourines and harps. We'd have had a big party if
I
you'd have
have a
told
good
me you
word
wanted
for
to leave.
that.
What?
I have a good word for that.
What?
Hooey.
Well, in the story of Laban and his sister Rebekah, when the servant came to find a wife for Isaac. What did Laban do?
He acted to keep them there longer.
He delayed things. There's some more stories we're going to read in the Old Testament about a host delaying the departure of their guests. And, every time the guest goes to leave, they've got another excuse for them to stay a little bit longer. Round and round and round they go.
Rude.
What?
It's really rude.
Well, in our day and age, it would be considered rude. But maybe that's just the way they did things then. But yeah, he didn't want them to leave quietly because he wanted the opportunity to delay the departure, and he was denied that. And this bit about giving them a big party for a farewell, I seriously doubt that's what he really would have done. I really seriously doubt it.
You know, he may have, but Jacob would have disappeared during the party, never to be seen again.
Well, that's possible, I suppose. Why didn't you let me kiss my daughters and grandchildren? And that's, again, an interpretation of this. And tell them goodbye. In other translations, it renders the Hebrew more directly. He's going to call these grandchildren his children. You have acted very foolishly. I could destroy you. I brought a whole group of my relatives with me, all ready and armed for battle. But the God of your father appeared to me last night and warned me, leave Jacob alone. Notice he also uses the God of your father, the God of Isaac. Not necessarily his God. And we know that because he had household idols that his daughter has stolen. I can understand your feeling that you must go and your intense longing for your father's home, but, and now we finally get to the real issue, why have you stolen my gods? I have a question for you. What does it say about your God if your God can be stolen?
Kind of a weak God.
Is it really a God that is worthy of your worship if your God can be stolen? And of course we know what he means. He means stealing the images to his gods. But still. Okay, we've had Laban's side of the story. Now we hear Jacob's side of the story. I rushed away because I was afraid, Jacob answered. I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. But as for your God... Now, is Jacob's fear here perhaps warranted? Thinking that Laban might take his daughters by force?
Yes.
I think given the character of these two men, yeah, he might have had a valid concern here. But as for your gods, see if you can find them, and let the person who has taken them die. Rash statement. Foolish statement, really.
I think that was a cultural statement, and I'm thinking forward in history to the guy who celebrated his victory with an oath to God that the first thing that came out of his door would be sacrifice.
Yeah.
Total barbaric.
Well,
I can't think of words right now.
you look at that part of the world today. A shopkeeper was given a death sentence because he displayed carrots and tomatoes close to each other, which might make shoppers think about male genitalia. That's the kind of mindset in that part of the world. And so, yeah, he would say this, but I say it's foolish because, unlike Jacob, we know who stole those idols. And he's just said, I've run away from you because I was afraid you were going to take my wives away from me. But if my wife stole your gods, you can kill her. He doesn't know that's what he said, but it's essentially what he said. And if you find anything else that belongs to you, identify it before all these relatives of ours, and I will give it back. But Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the household idols. Laban went first into Jacob's tent to search there, then into Leah's, and then the tents of the two servant wives, but he found nothing. Finally, he went into Rachel's tent. Now we're going to see Rachel be manipulative. But Rachel had taken the household idols and hidden them in her camel saddle, and now she was sitting on them. I don't know culturally what sitting on something meant, but in our culture, you sit on something, it's kind of degrading it. So here's these symbols of what you worship in your household, and she's sitting on them.
Ceremonially unclean.
Yeah. When Laban had thoroughly searched her tent without finding them, she said to her father, "Please, sir, forgive me if I don't get up for you. I'm having my monthly period." So Laban continued his search, but he could not find the household idols. Now, the account is very specific here. She kept them. We'll read about what happened to them later, but for now, she kept them. And she deceived her father in order to keep them. She pulled up this excuse. Now, it may not have been an excuse. She may actually have been having her period. But it was used to manipulate her father and hide from him the fact that she had, in fact, stolen his household idols. Then Jacob became very angry and he challenged Laban. "All right, we've done the investigation. You haven't found anything. What's my crime?" he demanded. "What have I done wrong to make you chase after me as though I were a criminal? You have rummaged through everything I own. Now, show me what you found that belongs to you. Show me the evidence. Set it out here in front of us before our relatives." The relatives were going to serve as the jury, so to speak, "for all to see. Let them judge between us." And Jacob's not done. He's really going to state his case now. "For 20 years I have been with you." That's where we get the 6 years working for the flocks. He worked 7 years for Rachel, got Leah, worked 7 more years for Rachel, during which time his sons were born. And then he worked 6 more years in order to build his wealth and his flocks and herds. Now he's leaving with them. So for 20 years he was there. Now, we have suggested in the past that Jacob was approaching 80 years old, and we'll see why that is. Jacob was approaching 80 years old when he left for Paddan Aram. So if he was there for 20 years, now he's approaching 100 years old. It might have been a little earlier than that because his father's not dead yet. His father died at 160. We haven't read that yet, but I'm just saying that. Abraham died at 175. Isaac died at 160. Jacob would die at 147. We'll read those numbers later in the narrative. So, assuming that he's, say, about 90 here, maybe he was about 70 when he left, so he's about 90 now. Still, we're just kind of, because it does happen to mention the years here. For 20 years I have been with you, caring for your flocks. In all that time your sheep and goats never miscarried. In all those years I never used a single ram of yours for food. If any were attacked and killed by wild animals, I never showed you the carcass and asked you to reduce the count of your flock. No, I took the loss myself. You made me pay for every stolen animal, whether it was taken in broad daylight or in the dark of night. If an animal was stolen, it was my fault, and you made me make it good to you. Now, I don't know if everything Jacob says here is true. He's probably stretching the truth a bit in stating his case. But it gives credence to the idea that Laban was no worse off for having had Jacob with him than he would have been if Jacob had never showed up at all. I worked for you through the scorching heat of the day and through the cold and sleepless nights. Yes, for 20 years I slaved in your house. I worked for 14 years earning your 2 daughters and then 6 more years for your flock. And you changed my wages 10 times. In fact, if the God of my father had not been on my side, the God of Abraham and the fearsome God of Isaac, footnote
The
C.
God of my father.
Again, yes. The C there will tell us that the Hebrew is the fear of Isaac. Let me finish that and then I'll talk about it. You would have sent me away empty-handed, but God has seen your abuse and my hard work. That is why he appeared to you last night and rebuked you. Now, last night, we didn't kind of get into that this time around, but we kind of talked about this Hebrew, Aramaic, and so forth language issue. Aramaic is the language of the Arameans and was apparently the language of Babylon, because the Jews led captive to Babylon adopted Aramaic as everyday language about the time that they were in Babylon. So they came back. The parts of the book of Daniel that involve the Babylonians are written in Aramaic. Aramaic was the language of the everyday language of the Jews in the time of Jesus. For normal conversation, they were spoken in Aramaic. For discussion of the Talmud and for religious purposes, the language of Hebrew was used. However, the knowledge of Hebrew and Aramaic are similar, but they're not the same. I suppose kind of like German and Dutch. They're similar languages, but they're not exactly the same. They're related language because Hebrew seems to have been derived from Aramaic, and the Abraham and Isaac probably spoke Aramaic, and having separated from the rest of the Arameans, then both languages kind of drifted in separate directions so that they became different languages. But at any rate, at this point, Jacob and Laban are able to speak to each other, probably in what passes for Aramaic or Hebrew, and understand each other. But I wonder, as languages that are live languages change, did the meaning of words change? And so we know these people misunderstood God, but the misunderstanding of God would grow over time. And the word that becomes fear here actually should originally have been respect or awe, not fear. And that it became to mean fear as the Jews got worse and worse in their understanding of the character of God and began to actually fear him. God is love, John says, and he adds, perfect love casts out fear. Fear should have no part in our relationship with God. So I just wonder if maybe the meaning of the words changed over time, and that's why it speaks about the fear of Isaac.
That text can bring about a guilt complex within you if you don't understand it.
Well, yeah.
There is a being that is not just exhibits, but it is perfect love. And it is that being that casts out the fear, not us.
Right.
We cannot cast out fear.
But when you talk about it being used to make you feel bad about yourself, it said if you're still afraid, then your relationship with God isn't right.
Yeah.
But what is it that casts out fear? It's perfect love.
But the perfect love is God.
Do the people around us exhibit perfect love?
No.
No. So, they can't cast out fear. And it may, in fact, be legitimate for us to have fear of some of the people around us because they aren't God. They are not perfect love. They do have ill intentions toward us. Or, at the very best, they may be ignorant and harm us without intending to, just because they're not being aware of the effects of their actions. But as long as we're on this earth around people who don't love perfectly, then there is cause to fear. Okay, Laban's made his case, Jacob's made his case, he's presented the evidence. Now is Laban's chance to make his case again. Verse 43. Then Laban replied to Jacob, these women are my daughters. These children are my, this version says grandchildren, but in other versions it says children. And these flocks are my flocks. In fact, everything you see is mine. Well, no. If it weren't for Jacob, you wouldn't have it. Probably.
Think of a cat.
But that's how he sees things. Hey, this is all mine. Everything you've taken, it's all mine.
Think of a cat. A cat is very selfish. It's all his, and he's going to mark it.
Yeah. But what can I do now about my daughters and their children? They've chosen to leave you. God has told me to leave you alone. There's nothing I can do about it. It's all mine, but I'm not going to make a big deal about it. So come, let's make a covenant, you and I, and it will be a witness to our commitment. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a monument. Then he told his family members, gather some stones. So they gathered stones and piled them in a heap. Then Jacob and Laban sat down beside the pile of stones to eat a covenant meal. To commemorate the event, Laban called the place Jigar Sahadutha, which means witness pile in Aramaic, and Jacob called it Galid, which means witness pile in Hebrew. So they understood each other, but there were differences apparently in their languages even then. Then Laban declared, "This pile of stones will stand as a witness to remind us of the covenant we have made today." Of course, on verse 47, there may also be possible that there was a difference at the time this was committed to writing, so the difference is noted here but wasn't noted at the time. This pile of stones will stand as a witness to remind us of the covenant we have made today. This explains why it was called Galid, witness pile. But it was also called Mizpah, which means watchtower, for he said, I know this says Laban, but the other versions will just say he said, "May the Lord keep watch between us to make sure that we keep this covenant when we are out of each other's sight." Now, let me read that out of the King James, because this Mizpah blessing, so to speak, is often repeated, and let me read it the way it is in the King James. Verse 49, Genesis 32. "And Mizpah, for he said, the Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent one from another." Now, we've seen that in this version they've interpreted it a bit and added these words about make sure we keep this covenant. But let's go on and read verse 50, because then we'll understand better the meaning. "If you mistreat my daughters, or if you marry other wives, God will see it, even if no one else does. He is a witness to this covenant between us." This Mizpah quotes blessing is actually sort of a threat. We set this up, and we're going to see part of what they mean by setting up this pile or this watchtower. And he's saying, if you do something I don't approve of, God's going to see it and he's going to get you. And we call that thing a blessing. Anyway. See this pile?
You're speaking for God.
What?
You're speaking for God and saying that God is going to act violently if you don't do what I tell you to do.
Yeah, don't a lot of religious authorities talk like that?
They sure do.
See this
and, there's a text out there. I can't quote it, and I can't tell you where it is, but it's something to the effect of making them twice the sons of hell as they already were.
Yeah. That was in the woes on the Pharisees in Matthew 23. "See this pile of stones," Laban continued, "and see this monument I have set between us. They stand between us as witnesses of our vows. I will never pass this pile of stones to harm you, and you must never pass these stones or this monument to harm me. I call on the God of our ancestors, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of my grandfather Nahor, to serve as a judge between us." So Jacob took an oath before the fearsome God of his father Isaac, or the fear of Isaac, footnote D there, to respect the boundary line. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice to God there on the mountain and invited everyone to a covenant feast. After they had eaten, they spent the night on the mountain. Laban got up early the next morning, and he kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. And footnote E there is going to tell us that in Hebrew versions, verse 55 is actually chapter 32, verse 1. numbering wasn't done until about 400 years ago. So I don't know why that's a significant difference, but at any rate, there it is. So then the footnote A there is going to tell us that verses 32 1 to 32 are numbered 32 2 to 33 in Hebrew text. Okay. Well, I guess if you were comparing to Hebrew, you'd have to know that the difference in the verse numbers is 1 when you're comparing. As Jacob started on his way again, angels of God came to meet him. When Jacob saw them, he exclaimed, "This is God's camp." So he named the place Mahanaim. And Mahanaim means two camps. Then,
what?
What?
It means what?
Two camps.
Oh, two camps, not as in bird with a big beak.
Oh, no. Two camps.
Okay.
Two places for people to spend the night.
Yeah.
Then Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau, who was living in the region of Seir in the land of Edom, possibly south of where he is. Not sure about that. I didn't look all that up. He told them, "Give this message to my master Esau. Humble greetings from your servant Jacob. Until now I have been living with Uncle Laban, and I own cattle, donkeys, flocks of sheep and goats, and many servants, both men and women. I have sent these messengers to inform my lord of my coming, hoping that you will be friendly to me." After delivering the message, the messengers returned to Jacob and reported, "We met your brother Esau, and he is already on his way to meet you with an army of 400 men." Jacob was terrified at the news. He divided his household, along with the flocks and herds and camels, into two groups. He thought, if Esau meets one group and attacks it, perhaps the other group can escape. I think that's kind of not very rational thinking, because if Esau meets one group and attacks it and he figures out there's another group, it's not going to be safe. I mean, if that's what Esau intends to attack. You turned up your audio. Now I'm hearing an echo.
I don't know why it came on.
Can you mute it?
There. It's off.
Thank you. Then Jacob prayed, "O God of my grandfather Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, you told me, return to your own land and to your relatives, and you promised me, I will treat you kindly. I am not worthy of all the unfailing love and faithfulness you have shown to me, your servant. When I left home and crossed the Jordan River, I owned nothing except a walking stick. Now my household fills two large camps. O Lord, please rescue me from the hand of my brother Esau. I am afraid that he is coming to attack me along with my wives and children. But you promised me, I will surely treat you kindly, and I will multiply your descendants until they become as numerous as the sands along the seashore, too many to count." Jacob stayed where he was for the night. Then he selected these gifts from his possessions to present to his brother Esau: 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams. So now we've got 440 flock animals, 30 female camels with their young, no mention of male camels. I guess the males would have been among the young. 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. He divided these animals into herds and assigned each to different servants. Then he told his servants, "Go ahead of me with the animals, but keep some distance between the herds." He gave these instructions to the men leading the first group: "When my brother Esau meets you, he will ask, Whose servants are you? Where are you going? Who owns these animals? You must reply, they belong to your servant Jacob, but they are a gift for his master Esau. Look, he is coming right behind us. Jacob gave the same instructions to the second and third herdsmen and to all who followed behind the herds. You must say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and be sure to say, look, your servant Jacob is right behind us. Jacob thought, I will try to appease him, placate him, by sending gifts ahead of me. When I see him in person, perhaps he will be friendly to me. So he's thinking transactionally again here. If I give him gifts, if I ply him with worldly wealth, maybe he'll be nice.
And again, what was it that Dr. Jean Sheldon wanted to know when she decided to study ancient Babylon history, which ended up being her field of expertise?
Yeah, why was God...
know why God was so dead set against Babylon.
Especially in the book of Revelation.
She found was that Babylon was responsible for introducing commerce.
Yeah. So the gifts were sent on ahead while Jacob himself spent that night in the camp. During the night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 servant wives, and his 11 sons, and crossed the Jabbok River with them. After taking them to the other side, he sent over all his possessions. Now, I hadn't looked that up, so last night after we recorded the session that didn't have any audio, I looked it up. I looked it up in the Bible dictionary, and it told me that the Jabbok River is actually a river that dumps into the Jordan River about 12 miles north of the Dead Sea. So I measured 12 miles north. It gave a name for that river. I measured 12 miles north of the Dead Sea along the Jordan River, and I missed it here. I came to this location. So here you are, and there is the Zarqa River, the Zarqa River. The Bible dictionary, which is quite old, said it was called Wadi Zarqa, or Zerka, Zerka. Well, different spellings for different ways to anglicize the words. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is it. So this is the Zarqa River. If you zoom in, nowadays it's not a very wide or deep river. And as you follow it along, apparently there's a ford here. Doesn't appear to be any water in it when these pictures were taken for Google Earth. But you can see by all the trees growing there that there is water in it from time to time. We might find some water in it here, sort of. Doesn't look like it's moving, it's just kind of there. So that's what we believe the Jabbok River was, and that's what Jacob is crossing at this point. After taking them to the other side, he sent over all his possessions. This left Jacob alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he could not or would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Now, when most people read this, they look at what's going on. A man encounters Jacob during the night. Jacob is all out of sorts about what's going to happen when he encounters his brother. He remembers the threats his brother has made. He's afraid his brother, with his 400-person army, has come out to do damage to him and his household. A man comes up to him, and Jacob likely reacted violently. And the man, it says God here later, it doesn't here, but as we read on a little further, it will say God, likely Jesus Christ, came there and did not initiate the wrestling match. Jacob did that. So he's simply holding Jacob off overnight. But he intends to leave in the morning. And when he sees that he won't be able to get away from Jacob, Jacob's not going to quit fighting him, he takes an action that makes it clear to Jacob that he's not dealing with a human. A human couldn't touch his hip and take it out of its socket like that. And that's when Jacob realizes that this is not human, this is God. And so he demands to be blessed. "What is your name?" the man asked. He replied, "Jacob." Jacob means deceiver, supplanter, one who grasps the heel. "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the man told him. "From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won." Israel, this version says, means God fights. Other versions will tell you that Israel means contends with God, rather than placing the fighting on God. "Please tell me your name," Jacob said. Well, what is God's name? It is his character, right? In this moment of realization, Jacob has come face to face with his own brokenness and his own faulty coping mechanisms. He's realized what kind of damage he's been doing to other people with his life, based on his confrontation with Laban and what's going on with Esau.
Dawn is approaching. It arrived, and Jacob recognized what he was like.
Right.
It dawned upon Jacob just what kind of a character he was.
Right. And so the person who has wrestled with him changes his name from deceiver to the one who contends with God.
You know, I'd like to have my name changed from Karen.
You did. You changed it to Renee. You used your middle name. "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared." The sun was rising as Jacob left Peniel. They notice that the Hebrew has a different spelling there. And he was limping because of the injury to his hip. And then as a footnote, verse 32, "Even today, the people of Israel don't eat the tendon near the hip socket because of what happened that night when the man strained the tendon of Jacob's hip." Now, when we tried to record this last night and didn't get any audio, my wife suggested that the 400 men that Esau had with him were not there as a threat to Jacob, but that Esau was coming out with the intent of protecting his brother. Are you there, or did you go to sleep on me?
I'm here.
Are you going to comment on that, or just...
No, I'm listening to see what you're going to say.
Well, I've said it.
Okay.
When we read the next chapter, which we won't do now because we've been on for an hour and 31 minutes,
We don't know what happened to Esau.
We don't know what he intended. But as we
We don't
read,
know. But, he knew the area, and he probably had scouts out keeping an eye on what's going on to know if anybody's coming to attack his own encampment.
yeah,
And he gets word that this unprotected large group of animals and people are coming, and he gets word that it's his brother, and his brother has no protection. And when he gets there, he doesn't show animosity toward Jacob.
that's what I was saying. When we get into the next chapter,
Out there to offer him protection, yet Jacob was operating under fear.
yeah,
And why was Jacob so fearful? It could have been that Jacob was projecting onto Esau his own faulty character.
well, it might also be that he had a guilty conscience. He knew he had misused his brother, so he's now imagining how his brother might respond to that.
Well, that's what I just said.
Yeah, oh well, after a sense, okay. Anyway, like I say, we've been going for an hour and a half, which is usually about when we try to end it. And this is what we covered when we got the version recorded without audio last night. So this is a good place for us to stop.
There's so much in the Bible that we don't really have answers for.
Right.
But when you take Dr. Boyd's comment that's posted at above the group, at the top of this group, that if anything shows God to be less than loving or compassionate, the teaching is wrong and needs to be restudied. If you keep that in mind and go in and start restudying some of these things that you've grown up with, and look for ways that would show love rather than anger, displeasure, retribution, etc., it opens up a whole different world where the Bible's concerned and the Bible characters.
Yeah. Next week will be the 4th week, and so we are planning to do a sermon presentation. I actually started it early this morning, and so I know what the topic's going to be now. I have the first 3 slides started. In fact, that's what I was doing when my wife told me that what we put up last night didn't have any audio, so we did this, kind of interrupted
That's
what
not
I was
what
doing.
you were doing.
Huh?
That's not what you were doing.
What was I doing?
I woke you up to tell you.
Well, yeah, but I had been working on it before that.
Well, okay.
So.
Maybe so.
So, we'll have another Friday night session before that, and then we'll have the sermon presentation a week from today, actually, since we're recording this on Saturday morning. And we usually stream that live starting about 11 Central Time. So, until next week, we wish you all a good week. And we say goodbye and God bless.
Bye.